So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. This morning's presentation is about a software platform that's an extension to MediaWiki called Wikibase. And it's not Semantic MediaWiki, and it's not Cargo, and it's not Wikibase Solutions, it's Wikibase. So first, as an introduction to myself, I am James Hare. I've been a Wikipedia editor since 2004, and I've been contributing to Wikidata since 2014. And what I found over the years is that Wikidata is just a very interesting project for expressing types of data relationships that you can't really do on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is just a little too narrow. And I found that Wikidata really allows you to look at the world in a way you really couldn't before. And it got me really excited, involved, and it got excited enough that I went professional and now do Wikibases for a living. So what I can help with is if you have a lot of data, a lot of reliable information that you want to share with the world and in a structured and organized way that people can build on top of, I can help you with that. But yes, I've been experimenting with this software since 2015, back before there were standardized deployment environments for Wikibase. You had to download the PHP extensions, and you had to go change the hard-coded values in the code, and then you just hoped it worked. And even then, that didn't actually give you everything you needed. You still had to do more work. So I'm just saying that I've been doing this for a little while now. So first of all, I've talked about Wikibase, and it's a pretty generically named product. So what is it? So in the most technical sense, it's a MediaWiki extension, or rather it is several MediaWiki extensions. You have your Wikibase client, which is the well, first you have the Wikibase repo, which is the provider of the data, and then you have the clients, which are the other wikis using that information. So in the Wikipedia context, Wikidata is a Wikibase provider and Wikipedia is a Wikibase consumer, but there are also a whole bunch of other extensions. And then once you have the extensions, you then need to add additional database services that take up plenty of RAM all on their own. But that's getting into the deployment details. You don't have to think about that right now. We're just thinking about what is this thing, and is this even suitable for what I want to do? So the main thing you'd use Wikibase for is to build a data model, a structured data model, and specifically an RDF data model that you can then put into a graph database and query. And Wikibase is used, as I mentioned earlier, to run Wikidata, which is like Wikipedia. It is run by the same organization as Wikipedia, but it's more in the domain of like very structured facts, while Wikipedia will give you, it'll give you facts, but more in a narrative format. It gives you more of the background and details, where this is very cut and dry and meant to be very machine readable. And one of the really appealing things about Wikibase as a piece of database software is that while other solutions try to box you into a schema, you know, your world has to fit the schema. This is a little more accommodating. It's designed for the real world. It's designed to capture a lot of the nuances you might find on Wikipedia. So you can have a simple factual statement, but you can also have qualifiers, and then you could have references. And so the example Wikidata people like to trot out a lot is that if you have a town and they have a cat for a mayor, you can express that. Wikidata won't stop you, and Wikibase won't stop you, because it understands that things don't always make sense. And so Wikibase is really great for those real world nuanced data set representations. And so I'm sure you hear me talk about MediaWiki and RDF graph, and your ears might have gone off thinking, wait, this is just Semantic MediaWiki. And now I personally have never worked with Semantic MediaWiki. I couldn't really tell you much about it because that's just not what I do. What I do know about Semantic MediaWiki is that it seems to be more general purpose and application. Like it doesn't try to build a data model for you and then tell you how to present that data. It just mainly gives you options for structuring data, and then you can embed that structured data into your wiki pages however you wish. SMW people, do I have that right? I see thumbs up in the audience. Excellent. And so, yes, if Semantic MediaWiki is more along the angles of regular Wikipedia style content, but with some more structure to it, Wikibase is a little more opinionated in terms of the user interface, and it's a bit more also. it gives you a very baseline data model to work with called the Wikibase ontology. And I couldn't exactly recite it off the top of my head, but basically you have entities, and entities are things, and they are people and places, and those are called items. To other items through properties. And using this example here this is from the Wikidata item on the Beatles. On the left here is the director property. So basically, the director property for the Beatles item, that's called the property. The value is Brian Epstein. And so what we did is we took an item and a property and linked it to another item. And once we did that, we now have added qualifiers. Okay, so Brian Epstein was the director for the Beatles during which period? Well, from 1960 to 1967. And then we have a reference. All these little things are properties built in, that are properties that Wikidata community members have created. So first they had to create the properties and then the items. And once they did so, they can relate them to each other through a nice user interface. And as for why this was developed and they did not just use Semantic MediaWiki, I could not tell you. Other than that, this probably fit their specific use case better. And so you could think of Wikibase as something really built for this project. And so you might be thinking, okay, this lets you do RDF graphs and structured data in MediaWiki. So what? Well, I think what started off this hype train that some people are on is that they see Wikidata, and Wikidata itself is very cool. What's really cool about Wikidata is that it doesn't really work like any other knowledge sharing project you've seen. People aren't writing words and sentences that then have to be translated into other languages. You're instead dealing with just the straight facts. The facts are stored using numeric identifiers, and they're related to each other in basically JSON code. And so I don't know if you could see at this small print here, but I just added a URL parameter here, uselang equals ZH. So now I can translate the Wikidata item into Chinese, and this is all the same facts you'd get on that Wikidata entry, but now it's just automatically translated to Chinese because the relationships between the things are recorded in an abstract way, and then people add translations for those abstract identifiers. So it's like, okay, now present me all the same information, but replace the English labels with Chinese ones, and it works. And the even more amazing thing about it is what Wikidata offers in terms of connecting the web together. So as you can see here, the Beatles has its own Wikidata identifier. For the purposes of Wikidata, the Beatles are known as Q1299, which is one of the easier numbers to memorize. So 1299, Q1299 is the Beatles, but you can see here links to other websites as well. You see Know Your Meme. In Know Your Meme, the Beatles are 12616. And in Klexicon, which I think is like a Wikipedia offshoot project of some kind, it's Beatles, just very simply. But because we have this database of all the identifiers, we can basically connect all the databases across the internet together and then use Wikidata as the central clearinghouse to say, okay, we call it this, but we know that in these databases, it's called by this and that. And this basically makes Wikidata the bridge between all of these separate databases. And not only does it allow you to connect databases together, but it's also an app backend in its own right, because it's a source of data, structured data, like you might need to use to develop an app. And so you can use Wikidata as a backend for apps. This of Scalia, scalia.toolforge.org. It is basically an explorer for journal articles, people who've been published in journals, universities. Basically, you get profiles about individual academic figures and about journal articles. And all of the records, all the views of this content are generated automatically based on queries to Wikidata. And so the particular benefit of this, and also the risk, is that by contributing to a broader data corpus, you are not just locking your data away in your database inaccessible to the rest of the world. You are contributing it to a part of a broader data set, so it's valuable to more people, and other people can contribute their own work on top of it. And so you are getting more than what you put in. And so I'm talking about Wikidata, how cool it is, and how Wikibase, which is what Wikidata is made from. And so what's the relationship between these two things? So you have Wikidata, which the largest and most well-known user of the Wikibase software. And Wikibase was basically purpose-built for Wikidata. It was purpose-built to build a structured data set off of unstructured Wikipedia content and for community members and volunteers to do this. And to have that whatever they do can also be queried as an expressive RDF data set. It's very purpose-built. And at the same time, it's kind of struggling with kind of how it wants to view itself. Like, is Wikidata mostly human contributed? Is it mostly bot contributed? Like, and if you have a bunch of bots showing up with content, like, for example, there was a big movement to get journal articles into Wikidata, and now they are like 40% of all of Wikidata. And the community is mad at us because we have ruined the search bar with all of our journal articles. So you can't look anything up anymore without getting journal articles. And they're just kind of everywhere. And you kind of come to the realization that the user interface and software was designed for a written encyclopedia 20 years ago may not be the best solution for having a database of 100 million plus entities, perhaps in the future over 1 billion. And so people are like, okay, where do we want to draw the boundaries on this thing? And what they sought to avoid to do was be like Wikipedia. Wikipedia will find any excuse to get rid of you or your article. But Wikidata is a little more accommodating. They recognize that perhaps some stuff is worth recording because it might be useful in other contexts, right? That's kind of the design of the site. You have to have those individual granular things in order to connect it to other things. But the problem there is, where do you draw the line? What is too much? Like, if I imported 100 million journal articles into Wikidata tomorrow and literally doubled the size of the site, that's theoretically allowed, but it would also alienate me to a lot of people who think I am overrunning their site and causing them to run into massive scaling issues. So one way I've started thinking about this is, okay, how do we get out of this? How do we get out of Wikidata as a sort of overloaded central point? How can we federate and decentralize out to more Wikibases so that you have Wikidata, which is sort of the general connecting point to everything, but then other databases that are more specialized and go farther and deeper than Wikidata ever could. And because they all use the Wikibase ontology, you can then figure out how to connect them together. So a property in one Wikibase can be connected to another property in another Wikibase. You can map them together and then query both data sets in a common database. But all of this raises the question, right? You like Wikidata, you like the opportunity it has to make information available in more languages, to connect databases together, to be a common data repository for the world. The question is it right for you? Is it right for the project you are trying to do? If you want to board this Wikibase hype train, this Wikidata hype train, should you? What is the best way to do so? And honestly, it's kind of a mixed answer, because if you get very excited about Wikibase, and I'm personally am extremely excited about Wikibase, you eventually come running headfirst into the reality that it's not perfect, and that Wikibase was very engineered to solve a very specific problem for a specific technical organization and social organization, and it may not make sense for other uses. And so whether you should use Wikibase or literally anything else, the answer is maybe. So here are the reasons why you shouldn't use Wikibase. Number one is that you just have a small amount of data, right? Wikibase is pretty heavy, right? You have to install MediaWiki, and I'm sure you all know how much work that is. And then once you do that, you have to have this whole other set of extensions, and then BlazeGraph, which is an obsolete graph database software that takes up lots and lots and lots of memory. And so if you don't have to do it yourself and you can get someone else to host it for you and like run the site, why not? So Wikidata is generally pretty broad in what they allow, right? Which is part of the problem I was talking about earlier, where it's maybe gotten overgrown. But because it's generally loose. Basically, what they're looking to see is that the entity you are describing is interesting enough to have been described somewhere before. Like or the item is needed to connect to other items somehow. Like it's very loose, and and generally, if you're providing something of value, they will be happy to work with you. And so to give you the idea of scale here, what can you mass import into Wikidata and get away with? For reference, the current size of Wikidata is about 100 million items. By reference, the English Wikipedia has about 6 million articles. So Wikidata is very, very big. And because it's so big, what you might think of as a large import would be kind of unnoticeable to them. And so have is that if you have fewer than 100,000 new items you need to create, you can probably get away with doing it directly in Wikidata. And if you need new properties to express those relationships because you want to express a kind of relationship that hasn't been expressed before, then you go to the property request page, the community take care of it. Either they create the new property for you or they tell you another way to do it with the existing properties. And if you can contribute directly to Wikidata, you should. And let the community improve on it and translate it and do all sorts of wonderful things to it. So, don't run a database if you don't have to. Another reason why you might not want to use Wikibase is that you have a more simple data model, right? Think of your traditional database where you have a table, and the table has columns, and then each record is a row. It's very straightforward. Wikibase can be used for that, but it's not really the right fit. It's sort of if your goal is simply to have basic table-like data, then Wikibase is a very over-engineered solution for that. And the cost for doing so is that you're going to have to run a bigger, more expensive database, and you're going to do a lot more work for something that's not nearly as complicated. And so I think if you're looking in the realm of MediaWiki extensions, I understand the best fit for this kind of use case is Cargo. I will disclaim that I personally haven't worked with Cargo, so I'm not sure, but it's my understanding that Cargo is like the best fit for this kind of use case. We have the developer of Cargo right here. Would you agree?
Yes.
All right, Yaron says yes. There's also stuff like Airtable, but Airtable is expensive. It's not MediaWiki, it's not open source. Another reason not to use Wikibase is because your data is already cleanly structured. And this is not necessarily intuitive because you'd think, well, my data is already organized, so it should be extremely easy to dump into Wikibase. And you'd be correct. The problem is that in order to construct this database, you are ultimately going through MediaWiki and you are going through a PHP script. And so if you're expecting to load like millions and millions of facts and entities into the database in a matter of like hours, think more like days, weeks, months, because you can only edit a Wikibase as fast as your MediaWiki install will allow, as fast as your bot can hit the database, as much as many database replicas as you have up. Like ultimately, you are going to run into that bottleneck of MediaWiki. And if your data is already clean up, you don't have to. You can just take the data that's already clean. You can transform it into a Wikibase RDF type set with like a script, and then import that directly into a database. BlazeGraph is what Wikidata uses. You could also use something like Virtuoso, which is more graph database on top of MySQL, or Neo4j, which is an entirely different thing that uses another language called GraphQL. But basically, if Wikibase was designed for turning Wikidata or turning Wikipedia into structured data, if your data is already structured, you don't really need Wikibase. You just need an RDF backend. I also don't recommend using Wikibase to visualize data. It just isn't a visualization tool. You saw my slides earlier. You saw how boxy everything looked. And if you want to visualize data, you will need another thing. You just will. So that's why you shouldn't use Wikibase. So you want to get involved with Wikidata, and you know the reasons why you shouldn't have Wikibase. But you still think, okay, maybe Wikibase is a good fit for me. And it would be if you have, for example, another print reference work that you were trying to create structured data out of, or if you wanted to like make complex annotated factual statements like you have an item and has this property, but under these situations and attested through these sources. Wikibase is really good at describing those kind of nuanced realities in a way that is compatible with an RDF backend. So it's good for adding structure to complexity. It's also good if you have like thousands of different attributes, right? Like if you're doing a traditional SQL table, you would have to create a column for all of those attributes, or you'd have to have some kind of multi-table model that deals with that. Or you could just use Wikibase, and Wikidata, for example, has over 10,000 properties now. So you can imagine having an SQL table with 10,000 columns, right? So good for that as well, or any graph database really. Wikibase is good if things have like different relationships to each other, right? Like if it's not just you have an employee database and each employee has a name and an address and so on, but if also those employees were related to each other and other things, and you wanted to like create this web highlighting how all these things were interconnected together, and you didn't already have a structured data set to do that, then Wikibase is great to do that. And crucially, the proposition of Wikibase is that you can basically blend automated data and human curation of the data, because you can have a bot post stuff to Wikibase, and then you can have a human look at it and say, okay, I don't like how this one fact is expressed here. I can change that. And then and it just, and it's friendly for the bot too. And so if it's all automatic, then Wikibase is not a good fit. But if it's a mix of automated edits and human oversight and curation, then Wikibase can be an excellent fit. And so if you wanted to like get the best of both worlds, how might you do that? And so one example that comes to mind, for years I've been obsessed with building a database of literature because I want to know what's cited in Wikipedia and what could be cited in Wikipedia, but is not yet cited in Wikipedia. And I also want to know what is cited by the sources cited in Wikipedia. I want to be able to go from the Wikipedia article to the sources sources until I go all the way down to the primary sources. I want that level of attestation for Wikipedia articles, and Wikibase lets me do this. And initially I thought I could just do this in Wikidata, and then I overloaded their site with journal articles. So I now want to create my own Wikibase that is as large as Wikidata, if not larger, focused purely on metadata for publications. And so my experience was trying this with Wikidata. I have a sense of what is a good idea and what isn't a good idea. And so if I were to try this all again, what I would try to do is, rather than try to create another copy of another database and just create the same thing you could see on another database. So OpenAlex is the new open data set for this kind of metadata. What I could do instead is just have a Wikibase, link to the OpenAlex item, don't create another copy of it. Instead, just link to it and then allow humans to add whatever data on top of it, and then blend the two things together so that I'm not duplicating data and I'm not duplicating work. That's one idea I have. And another simpler approach is if you just use a traditional database and you decide, well, one column can link to the Wikidata ID, and so then you have your own data that's separate, and then you have Wikidata, and you can selectively call in the facts you want without having to recreate that entire structure. So if you're thinking that this is something you might be interested in participating in somehow, then you can think of it less like, how do I run my own Wikibase, and more like, how do I incorporate the Wikibase ecosystem into what I am building, whether that's using the Wikibase software directly or using Wikidata as an identity broker or as a data host. And because this is all open source, open standards, we can basically work together without the coordination cost. We don't have to, because coordination introduces delay and expense. If we just know what to do without talking to each other, then we can all work towards the same ends in a decentralized manner. And I think that's where you get true scale. And so if you want to learn more about this, you can go to those websites. Wikiba.se is Wikibase. You could also go to Wikidata. I have more precise links, but I don't really know what the latest and greatest introduction to Wikidata is, because it's changing all the time. You can also scan my QR code and set up some time to talk to me if you're interested. And you can also, I will still be at this conference all week. So it's great talking to you all. Thank you. Yes. Oh, you.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Not very familiar with Wikidata.
Mm-hmm.
Seems cool. In the example you gave with like a cat being the mayor, like there was I assume there was an item for that cat.
Yes.
How would you store things that aren't like a number? Like, can you
Oh, yes. So statements can have different data types, right? And the example I showed was item linking to other item, but you can also have data that's just text, like just a regular string of text. You can have numeric quantities. You can have numeric quantities with units. You can have URLs. There's like 10 or 15 different data types you can go with. So I kind of oversimplified to make my point, but there are many different types of data you can express.
Would using a string then not allow the translation that you said was like it's just the facts and you can show it in any language?
If it's just a straight string, there are monolingual strings where you have a string in a specific language. So you'll say it's this value, but for English. It's this value, but in German. And then you have a text that is not of a particular linguistic type. It's just text. And so it wouldn't be necessarily translatable to begin with. Yes?
How do you deal with words that have multiple definitions?
You would create different items, right? So it happens all the time. Different things have different names. How many people named John Smith are there? So what you would do then is you would create separate items for each. And so you'd say this John Smith is Q whatever, this other John Smith is Q whatever. And you'd basically fill out those details as much as possible so that you can tell which is which. And ideally you'd have something in, so every item has a label, which is like the name of it, but also a description. Like if you ever looked up a Wikipedia article and you see like the name of the article and then the little descriptive text under, that's the description. And you can basically set that to whatever you want. So if there's something very ambiguous, then you make sure to set item descriptions that very clearly delineate what is what. Yaron?
Yeah. Well, I have comments and questions, I guess. I mean, you're definitely right about the Wikibase hype.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you mentioned unstructured data as a reason to use Wikibase. I would say that by itself is not enough of a reason to use Wikibase, even if
it's right. It's not by itself a reason, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, you can do it in Semantic MediaWiki. You can have any tags you want on any pages. In theory, you can even do that with cargo.
Right. I think the main difference though is that you would have to set up all of that in Semantic MediaWiki, whereas I think this just kind of does it for you.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, so yeah, my other real question is, are you aware of any successful uses of Wikibase outside of Wikidata?
Yes, several. There is enslaved.org, which is a database pertaining to enslaved people, and there's Rhizome has a Wikibase for artworks. I actually have an entire table of Wikibase projects. I'm currently keeping track of somewhere between 10 and 20. So there are several ongoing Wikibase projects, and they mainly work on like having very big specialized data sets like art collections or very specific biographical entities that may not make sense in the broader Wikidata context. And so, yeah, there are a number of projects running on Wikibase, and they're all kind of running into the same issues that this stuff is kind of hard to run, and there are scaling issues, and like there's no real codified best practice yet. Like you can use one deployment suite or you can use another deployment suite, and whichever one works, I don't know, it depends on what your needs are. There's no real, this is the way to do it, and this is the best way to do it for Wikibase. And that I think can be something of a hurdle And I think it's a hurdle that you may not even necessarily have to overcome if you don't have to. Yes.
This kind of maybe dovetails in with that, but I think I can understand how Wikibase would be useful for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. That seems like a really good fit.
Yeah.
And you mentioned one about rhizomes or.
That's the name of the. Let's see if I can find.
The question is basically, what is there any kind of use case, like a generalized use case with GLAM that
yes.
is a really good target?
Also, it's also very good in context of like biology and chemistry, because there are a lot of chemicals that exist, like a lot, like hundreds of millions, and also proteins. I think there's actually a project called GeneWiki. And it's like, and so yeah, a lot of the use case of find it right now. I may right, but yeah, basically use cases where it's like you need a database of a lot of items and you want something that resembles Wikidata, but you don't necessarily want to put it all in Wikidata because you have way more detail than anyone there wants, or way more number of items than anyone wants. Brian?
So I'm just curious, do you view the feature kind of like the federated features of like you can have your own separate Wikibase, but like you can kind of connect them with different. Do you view that as like an unfortunate kind of workaround of not being able to like put everything in Wikidata, or do you think that's like abstract, that's the ideal?
Well, think about how the internet was designed, right? Like the internet is a decentralized protocol, and because it is a centralized network couldn't, because with a centralized network you have centralized points of failure and other sources of inefficiencies. You basically have to coordinate at a very high level. And so I don't view federation as a workaround. I do view it as a fundamental feature. That said, it does not absolve Wikidata of its need to create a user interface that's actually suitable for Wikidata, right? Like I think ultimately both things are needed. And so I can see why someone would view federation as like a workaround, but at the same time, I also kind of view it as like something that would be necessary for this to run at the scale of like the entire internet. Any other questions? Any questions from online?
No. But moving forward, it does sound like we should repeat the question that you generally hear, but.
Yes.
Well, I just have a brief follow-up question. You mentioned we're already over this. You mentioned scaling issues as something that people run into, which is kind of ironic because that's supposed to be, one of the strengths of Wikibase.
I mean, it is, but the problem is that what makes Wikibase useful is a database called BlazeGraph, which is no longer being developed for one, but also it's just generally like it's efficient to a point, right? Like you're still, if you're going to run a data set the size of Wikidata, you're still going to need 128 gigs of RAM. And so it's like, yes, but not quite to the point where we want it to be, or where I want it to be to realize my maximal dream.
Okay, I think we should probably maybe switch over to Jeffrey.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.